Greetings, horror stories. My name is Charlie, and I'm from Detroit. For much of my life, I worked as a truck driver, and I must admit that I had a passion for driving. Although it is a very demanding and responsible job, and sometimes dangerous, either because of the sharp curves or the loneliness of the night. Now that I am retired, I thank God that I am able to share these paranormal experiences. They are really creepy, and to this day they still bother me every day. I was driving on Highway 75. I had been on the road for several hours, and I felt fatigue starting to set in. However, I was on a particularly dangerous stretch where it was not safe to stop. The road was narrow and shrouded in darkness. I knew I had to move on and find a safe place to rest. I looked for a place to stop, parked, grabbed my flashlight, and got out a few feet to relieve myself with the intention of quickly returning to the truck and resting in the cabin for a few hours. As soon as I turned to walk back, I saw muddy footprints leading from the road to the steps of my truck on the driver's side. He had left the door closed to prevent animals or insects from entering, but he had not locked it. However, I was in the middle of nowhere with no houses in sight, barely visible in the dark with the lights of my truck. No one could have been there. I was perplexed by the muddy footprints, and a feeling of unease began to overcome me. How could someone have gotten here in the middle of the night? The thought of someone lurking in the dark gave me chills. I slowly approached the truck, trying not to make noise, with the flashlight in hand to illuminate the area. The muddy footprints were fresh, and I tried to follow them with the light of my flashlight, but they disappeared into the darkness beyond the steps of the truck. A shiver ran through me as I realized that someone, or something, was stalking me. With my heart pounding heavily, just as I was about to climb the steps, the lights of my truck suddenly went out. I tried to keep calm, taking hesitant steps, attempting to back away, but I needed to get into my truck, no matter what. I hurriedly climbed up and aimed the flashlight into every corner, asking over and over who was there, but there was no response. I quickly locked the door and started the engine. I wanted to get out of there as soon as possible. I no longer had any desire to sleep. As soon as I started moving, a whispering voice echoed in the darkness, saying words that sent shivers down my spine. "Don't stop. Keep going." I abruptly moved the truck's curtain. The voice seemed to be coming from inside, but there was no one there. I began to tremble until I noticed a withered flower with black petals, what appeared to be a rose, on my bed. I was very surprised to see the pink ones there. I wanted to get rid of it quickly, so I threw it out the window. I rolled up the window and accelerated sharply. I wanted to get out of there as soon as possible. I hadn't slept the entire trip, and I was very nervous about everything that had happened. A few kilometers later, on the first bend, I hit something. I stopped, turned off the engine, and the silence became deafening. I went out to check what it was and if there was any damage to the truck. While crouched with the flashlight, I noticed that the problem seemed to be a branch caught in the rear wheels. After several attempts, luckily I managed to remove it. I continued to gaze at the tombstone, absorbing the meaning of those words engraved in stone. It was a touching gesture, but also disturbing, considering the circumstances I found myself in. The promise of the deceased husband had been left unfulfilled, and now I was amidst this strange and supernatural chain of events. As I got up, I noticed something strange on the sidewalk across the street. There was a ceramic cross embedded in the floor, surrounded by roses inside a glass box, as a tribute to a deceased person. I stopped to read the inscription on the tombstone, which read, "For every absent spring, I will bring you a rose, your beloved husband." Upon checking the date, I realized that the accident had occurred about 3 years ago. That year we had already passed spring, and there were only 2 roses placed there. At that moment, my hair stood on end. Suddenly everything made sense: the whisper I had heard minutes before, the tracks of my truck, and the rose that had mysteriously appeared on my bed. I was in shock, unable to process what was happening. That restless soul begged me to give him that rose that for some reason had not been able to, and I understood that he also no longer belonged to this world. The rose from that spring that had appeared in my truck was intended for his beloved. Tears flowed as she thought of the tragedy of that man, who even in death tried to fulfill his promise. I had just gotten married a few months earlier, and it was very difficult for me to imagine his pain and loss. This story was as sad as it was terrifying, one of those that is never forgotten. If you like the story, please like, just to see if you enjoyed it or maybe to let me know if you've had similar experiences. Good evening, horror enthusiasts. My name is James and I live in West Virginia, United States. I've been a truck driver for about 7 years, and I want to share this paranormal experience that happened to me about 2 years ago. I wouldn't wish it on any colleague, although I know I'm not the only one who has experienced it. One night while driving on a lonely road in the mountains of West Virginia, I experienced something that left me breathless. It was late and dense fog enveloped the road, reducing visibility to almost nothing. As I progressed, it became evident that my journey was not going to be very enjoyable. But to be honest, I enjoyed driving at night a lot. The roads were not crowded, and the tranquility of the night gave me a lot of peace, and I had been driving for more than 10 hours, so I needed to stop soon. I was listening to the radio, as usual, when suddenly my headlights illuminated something in the distance. A tall, dark figure, human in appearance, standing in the middle of the road hitchhiking. I stopped the truck abruptly and opened the passenger side door, asking him what he needed. It was common to encounter hitchhikers on certain roads, and I usually stopped to offer help. The man there was around 50 years old, and his clothes were noticeably old, dirty, and very worn. His gaze was distracted, he was dressed inadequately for the weather, and his hand showed signs of having been in contact with mud or car oil. It wasn't surprising, considering he had been stranded with his car. Additionally, I noticed a notable scar on his face, which impressed me with its depth. I asked him where he was going, and he responded that his car had broken down a few miles away, and he needed help. He asked me to meet him at the nearest urbanization. I responded that I could help him with my toolbox, tell me where his car was so I could take him there and try to fix it. He sat in the passenger seat and pointed in the direction of his car. I asked him if he was okay, since his appearance didn't seem to suggest it. The man remained silent, not answering my questions as he looked out the window. I kept driving until I realized we must have reached the place he had indicated, but I didn't see any cars. When I asked him if he was sure we were on the right path, his response was, "Keep going." As we continued a few more miles, I started to feel nervous. Not only because of the time we were taking, but also because I had a feeling that something wasn't right. A chill ran down my spine when I realized we were in the exact same spot where I had picked him up on Route 79. My route had been straight the entire time, so I couldn't understand what was happening. I was very surprised. It was impossible that we were passing through the same place. Furthermore, during the entire journey, the man had barely uttered between 2 and 3 words. I decided to stop the truck and politely asked him to get off as the situation did not sit well with me. The man stared at me without expressing any gratitude and walked out, slamming the truck door. I watched him venture into the woods, disappearing into the darkness, and in that moment I knew I couldn't leave him alone. Despite his rude manners, I understood that he needed help. The guilt grew, but it had already vanished into the thicket. I remember being momentarily paralyzed, not knowing what to do next. An uneasy feeling came over me as I looked at the dark blanket of trees that surrounded the path. I started the truck and continued without stopping until I reached the first urban area I found. There I saw a typical local bar, known among truckers for being open 24 hours a day. Upon entering, I met a colleague enjoying a cup of coffee. Upon seeing me, he immediately asked me if I was okay, noticing my somewhat tense expression. I responded that I was somewhat confused, as I had experienced something inexplicable. As he told her what had happened, his expression changed dramatically. He told me that on that same route, a truck driver had lost his life while driving due to a heart attack several years ago, and his lost soul was hitchhiking in the exact same place where he had died. Those who did not stop to help him mysteriously disappeared. His cousin had disappeared on that same route, and he remembered the last thing he had told him about a hitchhiker on Route 79, and that he had not stopped. He was in a hurry to deliver the merchandise he was transporting. After that phone conversation we had while he was on the road, the next day they found his truck, but they never found my cousin. After hearing my colleague's chilling story, I was overcome with a deep feeling of unease and fear. He had just experienced a paranormal event and could not understand that there is something beyond that lurks in the darkness. If you like this story, please like and subscribe so you don't miss other equally disturbing stories. Hello, horror stories. I dare to share this story. it happened to my girlfriend and her brother a few years ago, and I have permission to do so. It's a terrifying tale that marked their lives, and I don't think there's any explanation for this paranormal event, at least not for us. At that time, we were just friends, attending the same school and knowing each other very well. We shared summer afternoons, party nights. We were inseparable. A few months ago, her brother, a young truck driver following in his father's footsteps, acquired a new truck. He really enjoyed driving and sometimes shared trips with his father, as they worked for the same company. I remember that month both of them had gone on vacation together. Upon returning on a Monday, they arrived around 4 in the afternoon and found a note on the refrigerator door. He said that they had gone out to take care of their grandmother, who was not feeling well, and he assured them that he would call them that night to tell them about her progress, so they should not worry. My girlfriend and her brother couldn't help but feel worried, since their grandmother lived alone and was an elderly person. Despite being tired, they dropped off their suitcases, grabbed a coffee, and hit the road with the truck from Wyoming to Pocatello in Idaho. They had about 6 or 7 hours of travel ahead of them, so they expected to arrive early in the morning. My girlfriend told me they made a stop for a couple of hours after driving for a while. They decided to stop at a store to grab a bite and use the restroom. The store was completely deserted, with only a woman behind the counter. The light was dim, barely illuminating the cash register, and the only sound was the hum of an old refrigerator motor. Before entering the store, my girlfriend noticed a wooden cross planted in the ground a few meters away, adorned with recent floral arrangements, and the date of what she assumed was the death. It was obvious that it was a memorial for someone who had died in a road accident. This aroused her curiosity, so she asked the woman in the store who the cross belonged to. The storewoman, with a somber look, replied in a trembling voice, "That cross is to remember a young man who died in a tragic car accident a few months ago. It was a terrible event that shocked the entire community." My girlfriend was shaken by the response, but her curiosity led her to ask for more details about the accident. The woman, with a compassionate expression, told her how the young man had lost his life in a head-on collision with another vehicle on a nearby curve of the road, while on his way to his best friend's wedding. The story resonated in my girlfriend's mind as she continued with her shopping in the store. The idea that such a tragic accident had occurred on the same road they were about to travel sent shivers down her spine. Back at the truck, she found her brother waiting inside, sitting in the driver's seat ready to continue their journey. Upon entering, she noticed with surprise that the same flowers she had seen on the deceased's cross were inside the vehicle. With indignation, she asked her brother where he had gotten them from, to which he replied that he had taken them from the cross to take to their sick grandmother. She insisted that they did not belong to them, that it was disrespectful, and asked him to leave them where they were. But her brother refused and started the truck. During the rest of the journey, the atmosphere in the truck became tense. They argued about the presence of the flowers, and as they drove along the lonely road, the silence outside became increasingly overwhelming, interrupted only by the gentle hum of the engine and the occasional squeak of the tires turning. Until suddenly, in a curve, her brother made a sudden maneuver and they overturned. My girlfriend says she managed to see something standing on the road before they overturned, but she couldn't see who or what it was. The sudden swerve of the vehicle caught them by surprise, causing the world around them to spin in a frenzy of uncontrolled movement. My girlfriend barely had time to react before the car flipped, her heart pounding fiercely as adrenaline surged through her body. Amidst the confusion and chaos, she tried to stay calm as the car came to a halt with a dull thud. When they finally managed to regain their balance and exit the vehicle, my girlfriend hurried to check if her brother was okay. Fortunately, both emerged from the accident unscathed, though visibly shaken by the experience. As they stood next to the overturned truck, their gazes turned towards the road, searching for some explanation for what had just occurred. At that moment, my girlfriend recalled having seen something strange in the distance a few minutes earlier, a dark figure that seemed to be standing in the middle of the road. A shiver ran down her spine as she tried to focus on the mysterious figure, but before she could discern any further details, it vanished into the darkness of the night. She wondered if the presence of that figure had any connection to the floral arrangement in memory of the deceased. When she gathered her belongings inside the truck, before help arrived, she noticed that the flowers were no longer there. She considered the possibility that they had been scattered during the rollover, but all the windows were closed, and only damage to the metal parts of the vehicle was observed. But, at that moment, she was more concerned about her and her brother's health, thankful that despite experiencing a big jolt and several impacts, they were still alive. When they were assisted, they were taken to the nearest hospital in the community, and upon receiving the phone call at their grandmother's house, their parents went to see them within a few hours. After the accident, both my girlfriend and her brother were evaluated by doctors. Fortunately, they didn't suffer serious injuries, just some bruises and scrapes. However, they were both visibly affected by what they had experienced on the road. My girlfriend couldn't stop talking about the dark figure she saw before the rollover, while her brother was disturbed by the flowers that mysteriously appeared inside the hospital room. They were the same flowers he had stolen hours before from the deceased. The presence of the flowers in the hospital room only added more mystery to the situation. How could those flowers have made it to the hospital? And why were they exactly the same flowers that the brother had picked up from the accident scene at that store? Finally, the doctors gave them the green light to go home. Although still disturbed by what had happened, they headed back to their grandmother's house in Pocatello. However, the journey back was filled with an uncomfortable silence. Neither of them wanted to broach the subject again, but both were tormented by the unanswered questions swirling in their minds. My girlfriend and her brother tried to explain the details of the accident as best they could, but even in recounting it, they still felt a sense of uneasy. The atmosphere in the house was tense, as if an invisible shadow was present, reminding them of the strange experience on the road and in the hospital. As the night wore on, the feeling of unease didn't diminish. Everyone tried to carry on with their usual activities, but it was evident that the incident had left a mark on all of them. They went to bed that night with their minds filled with unanswered questions and a feeling of unease that they couldn't shake off. The next morning, my girlfriend and her brother woke up hoping that it had all been just a nightmare. However, as they remembered the details of the accident and the strange coincidences surrounding it, they realized it was real. The experience had changed them forever, leaving them with a deep sense of discomfort and greater caution when facing the unknown. Since then, every time they travel along that road, they can't help but recall that terrifying night and the unanswered questions that still linger. Although they try to move on with their lives, the shadow of that supernatural encounter continues to haunt them, reminding them that there are things in this world that escape our understanding and that sometimes truth is indeed stranger than fiction. They concluded that the deceased had taken revenge for them having taken the flowers that night. He had given them a big scare to teach them the lesson that the deceased deserve respect. Although it may seem like a crazy idea, they learned not to underestimate them or take things that didn't belong to them, even if their souls were no longer with us. If you enjoyed this story, give it a like and subscribe to not miss out on other equally unsettling tales like this one.